The basic premise of his principle is the end justifies almost any means, and so that breaks basic Catholic morality, and so he also was one of his rules, one of his rules was do what you can and clothe it in moral garments. For him, he loved to he used Catholic priests or bishops to show that, hey, this is okay, this philosophy works, you know, and while at the same time doing, you know, these immoral acts, approaches to the enemy. It's always about an enemy.
And you have in the film Mitch Pacwa, for example, a young Jesuit, and he saw how this worked on the south side of Chicago. What did he experience with this?
What he experienced, first of all, was he was trained by two Jesuits who would go on to form PICO, which is one of the largest Alinskyan organizations in the country. It's on the West Coast. What he saw in his training was you've got to identify an enemy as the fundamental premise of the group. Who is the oppressor here? And then you go and you publicly identify that person and attack them, which is we always say you love the sin, you love the sinner, but you hate the sin. The Christian orientation is never to forget the inviolable dignity of that other person, and to establish ways of dealing with the problems without the politics of personal destruction. And you can see how that's crept into our society in massive ways. And unfortunately, at the time, he received a lot of help from the Catholics who were feeling the impact of a lot of Pope Leo XIII's social teachings and wanting to help the poor, and Alinsky worked at the grassroots, which conformed itself to the way Catholics like to work, beginning with the family and the local grassroots decision-making, and so on, and this sense of working as a team in solidarity. These were basic social teachings of the church, which were very enticing for priests and lay people. They thought, gee, we're going to really help these people. But so much of it was raising money and throwing money ultimately at a lot of the issues in a classic left-wing progressivist orientation. We can just see how much the Alinskyan organizing took over programs, inspired programs like the War on Poverty. We now know by the fruits you know it. That quote, "The wolf in sheep's clothing," is, beware of false prophets, but who underneath are ravenous wolves. But it's by their fruits you know them. And so you got to show me now, of all those years of of Alinskyan programs, where is it the fruits? Where's the fruits? Now, you can, in our traditional forms of the church's work with the poor, Mother Teresa is a good example, you know, and we try to focus on, and Francis, the impact of our classic care of the poor has been so huge, and to turn it over to something which is basically being used to undermine the faith and or prescind from the faith is terrible.
And we can't forget, as you said, Father, it's so important to remember that these were times when we were dealing with very serious situations. The civil rights movement, there was this authentic civil rights movement that many black people needed the support. And so this came at a time when Alinsky enters into that situation and provides something because they want to help. They want to do right by the poor. They want to do right by this former racist situation in the inner city. And so it was, I think, and Father Mitch said it himself. He said, we really wanted to do something about this, but the problem is before you know it, because the end justifies almost any means, you're using these methods to actually hurt people, and you're hurting yourself because you're taking yourself further and further away from the life, your relationship with Christ. If you're doing that, if you're attacking your neighbor and committing all these kind of sins, and so there is an authentic care for the poor that we have to hold on to, and the way to do it is the gospel. It's the gospel life, Blessed are the poor.
We saw so many of these programs turn into violence and confrontation and destruction. And so, why? And we were seeing that across the whole society. We cannot really look at our society and the changes that we've seen in the last half century, particularly, without recognizing that there is a lack of fruits here. But we had a thriving, church and culture. We can see the spiritual development of Western civilization up through especially the 13th century, and then as the developing programs that led us into secularism began, you had this slippery slope, slow, hardly noticeable for centuries, but in the 19th and 20th century, it just drops off. And now our churches are getting gutted out. Why? Because programs like this, secular programs that don't draw on the supernatural life, act as if the supernatural life doesn't exist. Yet grace is what moves our classic social concerns. We're not just social workers. We are people who see the person of Jesus Christ through his mother in everyone, and rich or poor, And
that's why we, in the film, we really wanted to have a Franciscan presence. So we had Father Apostoli and Father Glenn Sedano, because who better to talk about the poor than people that are actually doing it? Because they see Christ in every person that they serve. And the ending of the film, we talk about Mother Teresa. Her commitment to having her sisters spend an hour a day in front of the Blessed Sacrament every day, so that they can see Christ in the poor.